everyone. Welcome back to It Takes a Village, the podcast where we talk about community and belonging and really explore how there's so many intersections in this life: faith, politics, art, love of creation, so many things that draw us in to who we really are. And our goal really is to find belonging as community and bringing ourselves, our full individual selves to the table. So we have so many exciting things to talk about on It Takes a Village. And we always seem to get back to the fact that it does take a village, right? To bring our best selves and to fully live as God intends us to. Well, today I'm excited to introduce you to Adam Whitty, who is Countryside's designated director for arts and worship and has really brought so much to our community, not only this year in his formal role, but has been on staff with us, has been walking the journey with us. But we want to get to know Adam in a personal way, as leadership really is something that, as a church member or as a community member, you can kind of scratch the surface and getting to know someone from their professional visibility and the role they play in community. But we know behind the scenes that life is life, and that somewhere back, I'm going to be Krista Tippett here, right? Along the journey, we had something pique our own interests, whether it was the faith of our childhood, our family situation. But we're getting to know Adam today. So, Adam, welcome. We'd love to hear more about you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to share a little bit about how I've ended up where I've ended up, walking with Countryside.
Awesome. So we're going to start from your childhood, from cradle to grave, good Methodists and
Sure, of
Christians
course.
among us. But yeah, have you always loved music? Was it the church that kind of brought that love to you? Or how did you really come to understanding that you were meant to do and be musical in the world?
Yeah, so it did start very, very early. When I was very young, like when I was born, and all of my earliest memories. My dad was a Lutheran pastor, and we were at this tiny Swedish Lutheran church
Mm.
in Sioux City, Iowa. But my dad had a music degree before he went to seminary, so music was very important in our homes, and we ended up at this church where music was a very important part of congregational life. There were children's choirs for all of the ages that were separated out by age. There was one that was
Mm.
for kindergarten and younger, and then one
Wow.
for elementary age, one for middle school, and one for high school. I mean, there were four different children's choirs, and this church was not very large, but all of these choirs had at least 10 kids in them. And it was,
Wow.
so it was a part of church life. And since my dad was a pastor, church life was a large part of our lives as a family. So that was really kind of how I got exposed to it, between spending a lot of time at church with the family, and then the fact that music was always a part of our home lives as well. So that was really kind of how it got its hooks into me, so to speak. And I took to it really quickly. I was a very, very energetic young kid, like real young, like at 2-ish. Um, they
Wow.
had some, sort of calmer little old ladies who worked in the nursery at the church, and a couple of them said that I was too high energy for them to deal with when there was a room full of other kids on Wednesday night. So they actually put me into the children's choir at age 2. Usually they limited that to just 4 and 5 year olds for the youngest one, but they just plopped me in there at 2, and I was like, oh, this is fun, and kept up with it. So that was kind of how I got my start, was being far too young for the prescribed age, but being tossed on in and being given a spot in there anyway.
Wow, right? That whole osmosis theory of, you hear it and experience it, and then you will become and make of it. Yeah, so
Yes.
which has taken hold, right? So was it
Yeah.
music like singing? Was singing sort of the bam, I just love, belting it out? Or was it
Yeah, singing.
instrumental music?
So singing was what definitely started it at 2. It was a choir that I was a part of. But by the time I was 4, I have a brother who is 4 years older than me, and my
Mm.
parents were gonna have him take piano lessons when he turned 8, because music has always been important to our family. So they started him in
Yeah.
piano lessons at age 8. He didn't really love it. He was pretty decent at it, but he didn't really love it that much. 4-year-old me thought it was the coolest thing in the world that he could sit down in front of a piece of paper at a piano and make music happen out of it. So I used to just sit and watch him practice, and then I would learn kind of what the song sounded like, and then I would watch his hands and figure out how he was doing what he was doing. And eventually, after a couple of months of watching him practice, I had figured out how to play a couple of the little things that he was playing, And
Mm.
so I was playing through one of those one time, and my mom called from the kitchen, John, that sounds pretty good. And I was like, Mom, that was me. And she came in and was like, what? And so
Wow,
then
that's
then
great.
that was how I ended up in piano lessons starting at age 4, was this interest that it had already taken hold from vocal music, put me on the piano path super early as well.
Wow, right? So an ear, do you hear, I mean, you're a trained musician, but is
Mhm.
ear and writing, do you have a really strong ear for music as still, even though you have learned theory and all the reading
Yes,
music?
yes, I do. Fortunately for me, when I started those piano lessons super early like that, I have an ear that takes to music very quickly. And because I started piano lessons so early, I started learning how to relate what I was hearing to actual
Mm,
notation really early in the process. A lot of people have
hmm.
difficulty because those seem like two different things. They can hear a melody and sing it back, but would
Yeah.
never be able to write it down. For me, I started learning the process of writing that stuff down around the time I was in kindergarten, like five
Mm,
and 6 years old. So it didn't seem like the big, scary, different language that it really is, because I was young enough that my brain was like, this isn't a big deal.
oh,
So,
that's great.
yeah,
Well, so I'm going to ask you a question because you brought that up. What, we've always heard sort of that math, like math and music, right? And I mean, I've talked to my own children about this.
sure,
I was one of those who learned the piano for years and years, and then of course I can't play it anymore.
sure.
Hold on one second. Technological error.
All good.
Because my AirPods are no longer in my ears, which happens. Can you still hear me?
I can, yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I was saying, like we always talk about music helps our brains, right? Fire on all cylinders. Like certain
Absolutely.
synapses in our brain are really, refined from musicality or hearing and playing music. Has
Yes.
that been something that you have, I know you've, taught as well. Is that something part of your pedagogical approach with kids or your own insights into how music has formed the brain in other ways?
Absolutely. So for me, one of the most exciting things, like neurologic, for music, is that it really does kind of use all of the areas of your brain, and it really gets them communicating with each other in ways that other disciplines don't. If you're thinking about math, most of the time you are in this very logical, sequential, spatial reasoning, and doing straight up calculation stuff. If you are freehand drawing, a lot of that is going to be more on the creative and like imagery side of things. And there's the fine motor skills of actually recreating that, but a lot of that is spent more in this expansive creative space. For me,
Mm,
music is the wedding of those two things, because most of the music that we do when we sing together, like in church, we have all just kind of agreed that songs go generally like this. And so they have certain numbers of beats, and you sing certain notes at certain times. So that is the mathematical aspect of it. But it is
mm,
also, an expression of text. So
mm,
you are thinking about the meanings of the words that you are singing. You are experiencing like a co-creation of something that, for me, it's exciting that every time we sing, that is the only time in history that that group of people has sung that thing. So we are creating something that is completely new. It follows a proscribed pattern, but every time we all together sing a thing, that is the first and only time that that thing has ever
mm,
existed. And for me,
mm,
that's a really exciting reminder that even if we sing the same song several weeks in a row, every time we sing it, it is different because of the people who are a part of it and the things
mm.
that they bring of themselves to that sharing of it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, not
Sure.
only the brain, right? Sort of
Yeah.
firing on all cylinders, but that sort of brings this great, like you said, this wedding of more than the polarity of you either read it and understand music through theory or you're hearing it, but then when you're singing it, like you have the opportunity to be fully present, right? And whole, using
Absolutely.
all parts of who we are, and then doing
Yep.
it together, right? Lists off the page in a very unique, kind of resonant way, right? That will continue throughout history. So
Yep.
for singing in church, you're doing an awesome, amazing, nuanced thing the very
Absolutely.
first time over and over again, which is pretty great.
Yep.
So, fast forward then, Adam, you've grown up with a love of music,
Hmm.
curated in your own home for your parents and the
Yep.
communities where you were raised, and you have taken this career path, right? Music has always been a part of your life. So,
Yes.
how has music, shaped who you are as a professional. And then I want to ask you, how then you bring that to your work at Countryside.
Well, it's interesting to me because my dad had his music degree and then became a pastor. I was obviously very, very interested in music, getting ready to graduate from high school. I'd always done well in school in all subjects. School was something that came pretty easily to me. I had a lot of really varied interests, some of which were like very cerebral. And I just wasn't sure that music was actually the career that I wanted for myself.
Mm.
I was like, I love music and I will always be able to find a place to do it. But what if I want to like go be an economist or something?
Mm-hmm.
Or what if I want to go be like a statistician?
Mm-hmm.
I liked a lot of math, especially up through high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of experimented with some of those different things as majors in college,
Mm.
and nothing really stuck. I was like, this is kind of interesting, but it's not fulfilling in the same way that music always has been for me. So that was kind of how I ended up studying music to get my degree.
Mm.
Was I had explored all of these other avenues of things that were interesting to me, and realized that the only thing that I was really passionate about was music and the power that I believe it has to shape people and shape communities and help reshape the world. So that was kind of how I got into studying music. um, and I had never really thought about the idea of being a church musician, but as I was finishing my bachelor's degree, I had been playing piano at the Methodist church I grew up in Omaha. I'd been playing piano for their worship services and their choirs for, I don't know, 5 years at that point. I had grown up there. I was a known quantity. The church had grown enough that they wanted to make director of music a full-time position.
Mm.
And they were like, you're already working with all of these ensembles. We know you've grown up here. Is this something you'd be interested in? So that was how I ended up as a
Mm.
church musician at the beginning of my career. Was I just happened to already kind of be involved, and it turned into this thing that they wanted a full-time person. And I really took to the work. I happened to have, a great cadre of volunteers. We could do some really high-level music in really fulfilling and interesting and engaging ways. And I ended up, I was an assistant for 4 years, and then I was the director of music there for 7 years. And that's really kind of how it laid the groundwork for becoming a musician as a career. I had
Mm.
eventually decided that it was something I wanted to study, but I didn't know what it was going to look like. I had thought I was going to be like a high school band director. That was kind of the direction I thought that I was going. And
Yeah.
then I landed in a church job, discovered that it was a really, really beautiful combination of things that are important to me. Ended up being there for a total of 11 years. And then, did a little sojourn of in between other music jobs. I did a little bit of corporate work just to kind of remind myself that that definitely wasn't what I wanted to do for a career. So that
Yeah.
was good reinforcement. And then I ended up, I worked with middle school kids, accompanying middle school choirs for a little while. Ended up teaching at Creighton, which was also just kind of amazing. Working in the choir world really had not been something that I had thought. Again, when I was studying, I thought I was going to be a band director, and I just
Mm.
liked to sing and was good at it or whatever. Um, but through all of my church work, that was kind of how I ended up at Creighton, and that was a really formative experience. Getting to work with college students in a music setting is it's a really transformative thing, because you can see these people who are growing into the versions of themselves that are going to be their adult selves,
Mm-hmm.
and to be able to interact with that season of life in in a medium where exploring your own emotion is almost like mandatory in order to communicate effectively.
Right.
It's just really rewarding to be able to engage with people who are already in a space where they're allowing their who they are to kind of work its way out, when maybe they've placed some sort of strictures on it leading up to
Mm.
that point. So that was a really, really engaging and formative experience, was working with my Creighton students. And then it was through that connection at Creighton that I ended up getting to work with the Countryside Choir a few times on a very like fill-in substitute basis. And then for a couple years coming out of COVID, and then now getting to be on staff and do not just choir and handbells, but all of the worship things. It's, I have arrived at this place without ever having set it as a destination, so to
Mm.
speak. But it feels like this is exactly where all of these things have been leading, and that this is where I was supposed to end up without just knowing it beforehand.
Don't you love that?
I
The
do.
car set, here we go. It's raining down, and you just pick it up, and it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
it has your name on it. Yeah, I mean, so much of life is like that. Some of the sweetest things. I mean, every poet, is written about like those flowers that bloom when your back is to the, wind.
Right.
It
Right.
feels like, yeah, you just kind of pluck those, and it's kind of, I always call it, the stepping stones of faith. And it's sort of,
Right.
people talk about those like in some ways people talk about the ladder that we're climbing to get there, and I love the
Sure.
metaphor where the ladder is lying down, right? And
Yeah.
we sort of go back and forth between, and these different stepping stones are not sort of a destination like a hierarchical place that we're supposed to arrive at,
Yeah.
right? We're just kind of walking, we're turning over those stones, picking those flowers, and we're always learning from each other, right? And the more you learn, you're like, the more I don't know. And so it's a
Right.
beautiful opportunity, right? And music has done that for you in the
Yes.
church, in the community, your own life with
Yep.
students, and shaping those next generations, and really seeing how the music, the vulnerability, right, that you're talking about is
Yep.
really transformative. Well, we are in the business of transformative work
Absolutely.
on the spiritual journey. How have you seen your experiences explicitly in the church as transformative in the way that you see music, right? Shaping the spiritual life of some of the people you've worked with, or just collectively engaging
Oh,
the
sure.
in a transformative way?
Sure. Well, um, I can't really go all the way through that without acknowledging that the work that I do with specifically like a choir or a congregation full of people singing together, that is different from just one person expressing music,
Mm,
because being a part of a community that is doing the same music, you are all agreeing that, like, hey, this is the thing that we are trying to do together. So we have some sort of common goal and common bond.
right.
And in order to do that, we have to all acknowledge that there will be times that our individual voice is the most important and needs to be the loudest. And there will also be times where our individual voice is not the most important and does not need to be the loudest. And we need to be listening for the things that other people are bringing forward. And that's, both a very literal thing in terms of the balance of volumes of sections in a choir. But
Mm,
to me, it's also good empathy practice,
mm,
being able to recognize when you come into certain situations whether your voice needs to be the one that is amplified or your voice needs to be the one that is supporting, while somebody else is doing the heavy lifting of communicating whatever idea is coming across.
mm,
I will just say that the power of community really just kind of sank its teeth into me right away when I started. When I started directing the choir here at Countryside, it happened that I started that in like the end of August
mm,
one year, and it was about 6 weeks later that my dad was diagnosed with cancer that would eventually end up being, terminal, and he passed away the following summer. But I had only been working with the choir here at Countryside for about 6 weeks at that
mm,
point, and we got the news that it was cancer on like a Wednesday afternoon. So I was going to have choir that night. And at the beginning of rehearsal, I was like, look, I know that we don't know each other super well, but this is a thing that is happening, and it's going to cause me to be in a different space and at a different capacity
mm,
than maybe I would want to be or I would generally be. And there was no hesitation, there was no awkwardness. I was just suddenly a part of this community of choir members, and it was like, okay, so we are going to take care of you because you were going through this thing.
mm,
What do you need from us? Do you need, Alex immediately was like, you ever need me to run a rehearsal, please just tell me. You ever just can't be here, we will make this happen. And, several choir members as well just
mm,
immediately came forward and were like, hey, whatever you need to do, this is now your local family. My parents lived in Virginia at the time. They were like, you are not by yourself.
mm,
We are all here. This is this is part of what we do as a choir too. Yes, we agree to have common goals of like musical performance, but we're also in the arena of creating whole healthy human beings that feel supported and feel like they belong. And so just seeing that 6 weeks into working with that particular group of people was just a really concrete reminder of the power of committing to that kind of idea of community.
Mm.
So I think music lends itself really well to that kind of support. And sometimes it's overt and explicitly stated like it was when I came with that situation, but that is always one of the things that I'm trying to make sure people can feel like on a Sunday morning when they come to a worship service. The idea of doing this one thing with all of these other people, some of whom maybe you've never spoken to, maybe you don't know at all, but the idea that we can all be in this place and do this thing together, to me is a really powerful reminder that no matter what else is going on, it doesn't have to always feel like we are completely alone in doing whatever that thing is. So that, there are folks who who will pull me aside after a Sunday morning where the choir will sing an anthem that just strikes a nerve, reminds them of a thing, and they will say, I didn't even realize that I was still feeling grief over this thing. And then you sang about this relationship between like father and his child, and it just broke something loose, and all of a sudden I feel like I have re-engaged with that in a way, and now I feel some peace that I didn't feel before. It can be something as specific as that, or it can be something as general as you go to a worship service, you kind of go through your motions and sing through the hymns and do the things, and afterwards there's just a little bit of a little bit less pressure, a little bit less oppressive feeling of whatever it is you came in with.
Mm.
So I believe strongly that especially the idea of corporate, as in with a group of people singing, can really have some transformative effects that are long lasting and really impactful.
Absolutely. You know, I've been reading this book, and then some of our staff have read it and doing this book study in Lent, the book Awe
Hmm.
by Deborah Keltner. And one of the wonders of awe is obviously music, right? And then another of them is Emile Durkheim's collective effervescence, right? And so both, music just, itself, and what the transcendent experience of a musical lifting off the page, kind of metaphorically, for someone, that euphoric experience, and then collective effervescence. Go to the concert and you're all singing the song, you just lose yourself in the oneness of,
Yeah.
right? So
Yep.
both of those, like basically the math and music part, the transcendence of what we are explicitly doing, right? Sort of, we're singing and we've all named, we're singing this song and this is the pattern, here's the rhythm. And then when you're actually doing, right, doing the thing,
Hmm.
the transference of, the self. I mean, he talks sort of about the self, the ego is shrunk, right? The
Absolutely.
ego shrinks and everything else, right? The awe
Yeah.
is that we are small and something transcends even our own understanding of what's happening.
Yep.
So the way you just talked about that, even with choir and the community, the things you don't realize
Right.
that are spiritually undergirding an explicit experience, right?
Yep.
That's the community all articulating that we are here with you, those voices or those bodies, right? So I thank you for sharing that. The vulnerability piece, right? Even offering yourself as, this is what I got. This is it.
Right.
And then knowing fully, hey, we have you. We're holding you. It's
Yep.
a great, beautiful way of, like the violin is still playing, right? The
Right.
songs are still lifting.
Yep.
So thank you. And I know that the choir and the congregation has greatly appreciated having you and singing your praises. And I mean, just your very presence, your positivity. So I want to ask you, as we close out here, what are some
Sure.
of your, hopes and dreams? If you could just say, this is what I would want for Countryside's music experience, or for someone coming to worship, or corporately, individually, leave us with some of your thoughts about, this is what you hope and you put out in your own spirit, for worshipers, and your leadership, and the way that your choirs, or those who are lifting their voices or instruments, what is your hope kind of for a worshiper at Countryside?
Sure. So my hope is always that during the course of whatever it is that we are presenting as a service at Countryside, that someone is going to feel comforted and made to feel as though they belong. So my hope is that there will always be something that is comfortable or accessible, regardless of whether you've ever been in a church service before or if it's your very first time.
Mm,
Um, Something that will engage your brain, make you think about something, maybe something that you brought into that worship service, maybe something that you just encountered in the other parts of the service, but engage your brain in, thinking of things that are related to whatever is occurring. And then my hope is also that folks will be moved on
mm,
some level, usually as a result of engaging with some sort of idea, but hopefully through either the act of singing with the other people who are gathered or hearing songs that are being presented by the choir, the band, a soloist, whoever, that there is the capacity for people to have something impact them in a way that changes the way they feel in that moment, whether it again is some sort of release of tension, or maybe it's a stirring of grief that they didn't know was lodged in a place that needed to be stirred so it could be expressed. Whatever that is, my hope is that that is always a part of what we do. So to encourage that, it is an interesting balance of trying to find ways to reach people who have very different musical tastes and comfort levels.
mm,
Trying to do that for everybody does mean that sometimes we have to, it feels like we are picking from a lot of different channels to try to make that happen.
mm,
But just acknowledging that that is in the service of trying to reach as many of the people who are in the room as possible to give them the opportunity to feel that through music.
mm.
Yeah, and I guess the only other thing that I would say is that I also think it is a really good place to be, to raise your voice in song, even if maybe you don't feel like you're a good singer. I
Mm.
think that we are rapidly doing away with places where we can go in public and not be good at something without being ridiculed for it. And
Yes.
I think it is a huge reminder for us that you don't have to be a great singer to come sing a hymn during a worship service, and we need every voice to be a part of it, even if it's not trained, because
Mm,
that is the point. The point isn't the training, the point isn't the beautiful harmony, the point is corporate worship where everybody feels like they're a part of it. So
mm,
that's the other part of it, is trying to pick things so that everybody will feel safe enough to put their voice out there, even if it's not going to sound like they've been studying it their whole life.
mm. Oh, that's really beautiful. And you know what? It makes me think when you just said that last part about, trained or not trained and the harmonies, is that so much. I mean, if you think of other cultures throughout the world and across civilizations and time, and I'm thinking my own experiences in African countries and developing world where
Sure.
there are very dissonant experiences and scales, right?
Yes.
And tones that are very, pleasing or displeasing, depending on your ear, your appetite, your enculturated understanding of what trained and what harmony and what it looks like, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a great reminder that, no matter who or where or what, when you're offering, right? If you're not crying out or praying out, the stones will, right? The whole
Yes.
lifting your voice and singing, and that's beautiful. And that's really praising God. I mean, worship, our opportunity to encourage and invite and set the stage, right? Where somebody coming in, like you're talking about, can have an experience with God, with love,
Absolutely.
right? The all
Absolutely.
present,
Yep.
compassionate, loving God who is with you right now. And so, if that means knowing that there's enough voices, right, to add your own, because you may not do that as a soloist, but because the
Right.
full expression of God's people are uninhabited, then you too can lift your voice, and it's God who harmonizes that praise and that worship in a way
Absolutely.
that lifts us, right? So I love
Absolutely.
hearing that. And I also share that because I have been trained and I never actually made it off the page. I'm like, yeah, singing the choir voice, but I'm like one of those, it's like,
Sure.
really, it really sunk in.
Yep. Yep.
I'm
I
in
get
the
that.
African developing world, just, kind of in the dissonant tonal category. But yeah,
Sure.
I think all the voices and the praise and the opportunity to not be judged or ridiculed or afraid of being fully self, right?
Yep.
So I'm so glad you reminded us of that. Well, Adam, it has been such a joy to introduce all of our
Yes.
listeners to you. I mean, most of our countryside community already knows Adam, but getting to
Sure.
know you at a deeper level, hearing a little bit of your experiences, your heart for worship, and knowing that you're going to be with us on this journey. You've been such an instrumental, transformative, positive presence. I know our staff really enjoys getting to know you and having as part of the team. And all of your choir members would probably, write me a really lovely letter if you weren't present there anymore. So we love you and appreciate you, and we're so happy to have you. So thank
Well,
you for being here.
I appreciate it, and the feeling is definitely mutual. I love having landed at Countryside.
Awesome. Well, it takes a village. That means it takes all of us, whether we're singing, dancing, telling the stories. But thank you for being with us, friends, on It Takes a Village. This is the podcast where we talk about community and belonging. We ask bold questions, and then we also settle into the rhythms of life, knowing that there are way too many barriers for us already. So bring your full self and know that you are welcome and you're a part of Countryside. No matter if you've been here once, if you're only online, reach out to either Adam or myself if you have questions, and we will see you here next week. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you.